how to build static and dynamic core stability. When we talk about core stability, I've talked about it in the past, it's a lot about muscle timing. But again, when we're talking about exercise and everyday movement, it's dynamic. So the body's moving, so how muscles need to work with that movement. So not only do we need the timing of the muscles to be in a static posture, which is what we're going to talk about, but we also need it to be dynamic as we go through certain movements. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down what core stability is, as I've just started to describe, and then we're going to break it up into that static and dynamic, and then build each process onto each other, so you can have a sort of a logical understanding of how to build this type of core stability that is going to be beneficial for you. If you want to build core strength and stability, click the link below. You'll go through to my How to Build Core Strength and Stability 12-week program. It builds on the concepts that we're going to talk about in this tutorial. So it's structured in a way that moves from static to dynamic, that builds core stability around not only exercise, but also movement. Part 1, what is core stability in and of itself? Well, core stability is the muscle's timing that results in a smoothness of movement. So the muscles have to activate and contract at certain times to develop a smoothness of movement. So what that basically means, if I was to go down into a back lunge, now this is more around the hips, the knees and the ankles, but the concept and the principles still apply. So what happens is, as I go down into this back lunge, I come up, I step through, and I land, and I complete the movement. So I've gone from that sort of back lunge position up into that single leg stance and then down into the forward lunge. But all the way through, the movement was smooth, the movement was controlled. So that's showing good stability through those muscles. And that's what we need to generate around the spine to keep it stable. So what we're going to do next is look at a static stability, and then we're going to look at a more dynamic stability, which is more applicable in sports and performance and also in everyday life as well. So building on what I talked about before, when we've got a beginner, or when I've got a beginner, this is something that needs to be developed. So I'll take them through an assessment process, and we understand that they need stability. This is how we would go about someone who's completely new to exercise to be able to build it. So we need to start with static postures, because what we want to be able to do is get the spine nice and stable and get the muscles around it working properly. So a very simple way of doing that is going into a bird dog. So we come into this position, and then all we do is we extend out into that position. Now, there are other exercises that do this, but this is probably the easiest way to explain it, because it covers as many bases, because there is a bit of movement involved. There is a bit of instability because we're lifting one leg and one arm, but the concept still applies to maintain the stability of the spine. So what we're looking for from a bird dog is the same as I did with that lunge, is a nice smoothness of movement, but what I'm looking for is well balanced, and yes, there will be a smoothness of movement as the leg goes out, but mainly we're looking for the rotation of the shoulders and the hips. So we come into this position and we extend out. We go into this position, and what we're looking for is level shoulders and level hips. What we don't want as they go out is this to start happening, because what that's doing, that's saying the muscles of the hip and the muscles of the shoulder, they're starting to, some are starting to activate, some are starting to deactivate, and it's creating this position. So they'll activate on one side and do this, and then they'll activate on the other side and then do that. When we've got a smoothness of movement, they're balanced. So that's what we're looking to create. So that might mean having a wider stance and going into the position, and then coming down and changing over. As they get better, we go narrower, we go out, and we come back, and then we go out. We add a longer pause, because what you can get sometimes is some people will go, and they'll be very quick. What we also need to do, if they are doing that, we need to slow it down to try and keep that position of the spine, because what we don't want is this to start happening, and you extend the spine, because again, you're shutting off muscles around the spine, making it more unstable, making it more prone to injury, to aches, to pains, to muscle tightness, so on and so forth. So the first key is to get that static stability in place. The final thing I can say, and this is why we need to get it in place, is because if I'm in this static position, I can think about what all these muscles are doing. It's a very low risk position to be in, so there's very low risk of injury from it. I'm not going to sort of fall and hit my head on the floor because I can just put my arm down. If we've got weights and we're moving weights around in dynamic positions, there's a greater risk of injury. So if we've got a beginner, we've got to build it in a sensible way that is going to keep risk of injury low, but maximise the fitness that we can get out of it, or maximise the result that we can get out of it. So what we've got to do is we've got to find and use these exercises properly to be able to build that static stability. Once we can understand what we need to do with the stomach muscles, what we need to do with regards to the smoothness of movement, we've kept the skill level low, and what that means is that it's not a complicated movement. All I'm asking them to do is I could ask them to do that first, and then that, just to learn the position of the spine, position of the shoulders, position of the hips, get the tummy tight. So I just want those skills to be learnt first, then we can start layering that into the full bird dog, and then once we've got that amongst a few other exercises, we can build into more dynamic movements. And that's what we're going to start doing now, is looking at some dynamic movements about how we can start to develop that core stability. So with regards to core stability, again, we're looking at muscle timing, but we're looking at smoothness of movement. Obviously, with core strength and core endurance, it's just the ability to hold a position. What we're looking for now is a movement and a smoothness of that movement. So I've got a cable set up here, I've got a kettlebell there. So all I'm going to be doing is starting to develop some degree of movement within the body. So what I might just start with is this position and just moving the arms. So again, I've got the core strength to be able to be in the position and hold it. I've got the core endurance that I'm going to do for a long time, but I've also got the ability to move the shoulders and move them in a smooth way. So I'm going through that smooth sort of pattern from shoulder height down to the hips. From shoulder height down to the hips. So that could be one example of building that core stability, but what we would look to do is take that on a step, come into a wider stance, and come down into that position. So again, it's smooth, it's strong, we're holding the position, we're maintaining good position of the back. So as you can see here, or what I'm not doing is coming into that position, I'm coming down, I've got a smooth movement of the arm. I'm also combining movement of the limbs. So not only with the first exercise, I'm starting just with the shoulders, holding everything completely still and just coming down like so. That's obviously one limb, which is the arms, albeit two arms, but let's just say one limb. Then what I'm doing is what I want to be able to do is get the limbs working together. So as I'm coming down like this, I'm also working the arm. So what we might start with is just get that bit first, and then combine that with what you've just done before, which is that. So we've got, again, that building from the simple skill to a more complicated skill, but it's developing that smoothness of movement to get the core stability from it. What we can then do is take on, if I use another example of a static exercise, which is sort of a semi-static, semi-dynamic exercise, but if I come down onto one knee, so the static exercise, can we go into this position and just hold it and be balanced? So that would be the first one. That would be included in the static stability. If we want to make it a little bit more dynamic, what we can do is then start haloing the kettlebell. It makes it more unstable. We've got to be smooth. We've got to have smoothness of the arms. We've got to go in different directions, so on and so forth. What we can then do is develop that Again, all of this has got to be done in a smooth way, but now we make it more dynamic, a little bit more explosive as well. So we're now starting to bring in a little bit of power and speed. But again, we need to still build that smoothness. And we've got to have muscle contraction as we start the weight. So we go there and around. We've got to slow it down, and then we've got to take it the other way. So again, it needs that stability, that muscle timing to flick the weight and come around. So you start to see how core stability starts to develop. And this is how the 12-week program works and how it builds into the intermediate and advanced workouts. So you do a 12-week program, and then you've got intermediate and advanced workouts that use different bits of equipment, like a kettlebell, where you can start moving it around, so on and so forth. But if you're a beginner, you start with just some basic static exercises, and then you build up into these more dynamic movements because you've learnt the skills down here to be able to do up here, if that makes sense. So we've got those dynamic exercises, other ones with kettlebells. Again, a more static exercise, which we could have included in the section before, is here. Then we can make it more dynamic by, and again, we've just got the little bounce, the little flick, to be able to make it more dynamic. But those are some examples of how we can build that dynamic stability, because, as I mentioned, dynamic stability or stability is muscle timing, but that results in a smoothness of movement. So if you've got nice smooth movement, you can generally say you've got good stability as you're moving that weight. So that is what we want to do. We want to go from that sort of static all the way up into the dynamic. So to summarize what we've talked about, we've gone from static stability all the way up into dynamic stability. We've kept the skill level low and then built it up high. And then we can start adding weight. Obviously you would start low and you would build up high. So the complexity of the exercise is simple, and then it becomes more difficult. Very few limbs moving down here, but you may have more limbs working up here, or heavier weights, so on and so forth. So all of that goes towards to how you build core stability from a beginner up to an advanced, but you do it in a sensible way. You build the static and the dynamic in a logical way. If you like this content, you found it useful, maybe you've learnt something, stick a comment in the below, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, you'll be notified when I release my next one. As I mentioned, if you do have a comment or a question, stick it in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as possible, and then we'll be able to get those questions answered and get you on the road to building core strength and stability. So many thanks for watching. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.